Okay, now let me quickly go through the big picture again. Remember, I told you there was two major parts to our course, right? We had the foundations of curriculum, and then we have the principles of curriculum. So, in the foundation, we covered four major areas. We covered philosophy, we covered psychology, then we covered historical, and then we covered social. So, there are four major components in the foundation of curriculum. Then we now have to move into the more technical part of the course, which is called principles of curriculum. So here, principles of curriculum is divided into four parts again. So you have the design, curriculum design, then you have development of curriculum, then you have implementation of curriculum, and finally, like everything else, you have evaluation of curriculum. So this is the first video series of curriculum design. Now, the curriculum design itself has a few major parts, so let's go through them. Now, let's talk about curriculum design in general. What is curriculum design? Curriculum design is where you start off with a written document. Assuming it's the first day of class, when you walk in, you get this written document. And you must view this written document as the Trojan horse. Because inside this, you have all these other wonderful things that it's not explicitly written, but you need to bring it alive. Just like the Trojan horse came in as a piece of wood, but within that lied all the potential arsenals to attack the city of uh, Troy, I think. Okay, now uh, the curriculum, the written curriculum, and the curriculum of practice has its own unique shape and design, which you need to be aware of. The goals of the curriculum, the objectives at the end of the day, what this curriculum hopes to achieve. The curriculum design have to have the objectives, the subject matter, the teaching and learning experience, and the evaluative procedures all compact within the encapsulated. So just like the Trojan horse. Okay, curriculum design. Let's focus in on curriculum design directly, right? So now curriculum design, for this course I will be only covering content and learning experience, because I will leave the evaluation to be taught in the assessment course. Okay, now but nevertheless, please be mindful that curriculum design has everything, right? It has right from the content, the learning experience, the assessment principles, and the evaluative theories. So they all come into curriculum design, but for delivery mode, we have decided that in this course I will just cover content and some notion of learning experience, but learning experience in detail will be covered by the course in teaching for learning. Okay, now let's talk about content. Now, content itself has four areas that we would like to talk about. That is, what is content, how should students learn content, how should content be selected, and principles of content organization. Okay, we will cover now what is the notion of what is content. Now, content is affected by the view of knowledge and philosophical position. I think we covered extensively of this in the first half of the course, because your philosophical position will determine how the content is going to be taught. Remember, if you're a perennialist, you had a particular view of content being very stable and is everlasting and it focuses on internal truth. If you are, on the other hand, more progressive, you may choose content that are very fluid and is very contemporary. So it depends what is your philosophical position to choose content. Now the second notion is there are varying concept of content. So the concept itself may vary. For example, we can talk about some curriculum. Okay, some curriculum designers conclude that content is really another term for knowledge consisting of a collection of facts, concepts, generalization, principles, and theory. See, this is really important because remember we were in the previous course we talked about some people saw content as a process. So the whole idea was to master process of accumulating content, whereas some people saw their job as transmitters, just transmitting content. So this is where you have issues such as, like for example, someone who's doing geography will worry about spatial relationship between two or three objects, whereas someone in physics will worry about notion of acceleration and things like that. Okay, so this is how they vary. Now, the disciplines such as biology, chemistry, sociology, psychology are concerned with advancement of understanding and exploring the unknown. So, the whole notion of content is preparing the students to handle and tackle uncertainty. So, this is very important. As I told you, in a particular case, when I was studying, doing a research in understanding of maths, this particular professor from University of Moscow was terribly troubled because he was teaching postgraduate level maths in a Malaysian university, and he felt that Malaysian students particularly, or at least in his case, math students particularly, were not comfortable handling unknown. He said a typical mathematician may bump into a problem and potentially spend uncountable amount of time. I mean, they have questions that are unsolved for 400 years. For example, the Freeman's last theorem. Whereas, because the way we teach maths, people have the fallacy that they should solve maths within 20 minutes. They should start a question immediately. They should have an idea. They follow the idea through the end, and miraculously the answer should appear at the end. In reality, this is not the case because one has to evaluate the assumptions and hypothesize a solution, take it forward, and discover that certain assumptions were wrong. They have to backtrack all the way. So the whole idea is the discipline must be taught in a way of advancement of understanding and exploring the unknown, not teaching a certainty. See, that is the biggest difference because we are not teaching science, we're teaching scientists. There's a big difference. The way we prepare scientists and the way you teach science. If you view science, for example, physics, as a fixed body of knowledge, then there will be no difference teaching physics to, let's say, teaching theology. Everything is fixed, right? Physics must be viewed as a process, knowledge in transition. So the way we are approaching uncertainty, unknown, is so different in the way we design it. It comes back to the notion of design. Okay, and then the final part is the notion of selecting content. Okay, content selected is aimed towards helping students understand knowledge the way new to be new to them, but it's already known to scholars and practitioners in the field. So this is really important to know that what is established is new to the learner. So from this body of knowledge or discipline, content is selected for educational purposes and organized according to their cognitive level of learners. Now, for example, the body of modern mathematics, if you take, uh, I mean, it's a collection, it's the documentation of 400 years of civilization. So we take the students through chronologically 400 years of learning and understanding, but it's organized in a fashion where it's it matches with the cognitive level of students. So that is a big issue, and even this there's a big contestant. For example, in many fields there's a big dispute between pure theorists versus educationists. For example, a science teacher may argue that science need to be taught this way, whereas a pure scientist will say, but historically or chronologically, this is not how the knowledge was developed. So some people want to be historically correct that this has to come first, then followed by this idea, followed by the third idea, whereas an educationist may say, but if you have written it the other way around, students will understand it better. Now, the next thing of content we would like to cover is how students or how should students learn content. Now, when we come to this, we will have three major ideas we will talk about. The first one is some people feel that content should be prescribed and transmitted to learners from a very behaviorist perspective, right? While others feel content should be constructed by learners, very constructivist. So now here, what basically scholars are talking about is, you have to make a decision here now. Do you want the students to absorb transmitted knowledge or to construct this new knowledge. That means they will have varied meaning to certain objects, but the meaning will be theirs. It could be everlasting. Okay, the second notion is in the former setting, if you talk from a behaviorist perspective, learners are passive recipient of facts, concepts, and generalization of subjects, while the later situation, learners seriously engage in the construction of meaning. Now, students have always asked me, if you know one is better, why don't we always use the second one? Since most of the books cover constructivist as a very positive approach to teaching and learning. The question here is sometimes there's two notions. In fact, there are two major issues why constructivism may not always be the best solution. Number one is prior knowledge. You need certain degree of prior knowledge to construct new meanings, because we can't engage in a conversation or a dialogue if you fail or you lack the fundamental vocabularies. You know, for example, how do I talk to you about Newton's third law if you don't know what are the fundamentals that Newton talked about? See, there must be a certain degree of content to continue to subsequently to participate in the dialogue. Second, once again, as I told you in another lecture before, teaching is about compromise. A lot of what teaching is a compromise. How do you distribute time? Because everybody knows any activity from a constructive perspective may take substantial amount of time, and deliberating time, content, and finishing curriculum becomes a serious issue sometimes. Okay, the final one is content is just not something told to the students, but rather something that students personally construct. Okay, similarly, some educators argue that more important to learning the process of content than the product of content itself. Such a view divides content as consisting of product and process, while the reality both should be given equal emphasis. Now, this is a classic argument that you have seen in so many different places. Is the learning process about content, or is it about process? Okay, and the whole argument will continuously go for on ever, I guess. It is one of those everlasting dialogue that will never end, and it keeps people like me employed forever. Now, if you view content as a body, then content is considered declarative knowledge. What students should know. See, knowledge has few definitions. We will learn in detail in another philosophical setting, hopefully. One of the ways to view knowledge is declarative. That means I'm telling you F equals to MA. I'm telling you that Malaysia was a country that was colonized by the British. We got independence in 31st August 1957. It's declarative knowledge. You either know or you don't know. Okay, so it will have things like it will cover things like, hold on, let me get this thing right. Yeah, it will cover things like facts, concept, principles, body of knowledge, right? So if you view knowledge as declarative, this is all your issue. But if you view knowledge as procedural, what one should be able to do, then you will focus on things like procedure, thinking, skills, method of inquiry, body of knowledge, things like that. Now the next one we would like to talk about is how should content be selected. Okay. Now, because selection of content is just as important as the entire teaching and learning process is concerned. Now, there are five basic guides to how to like content. You have the significance of it, the utility value of it, the validity of it, the learnability, and the feasibility. Okay, Austin, our prescribed text talks about how these five approaches need to be fulfilled. Now, the first thing, let's talk about content selected should be significant. Now, what does it mean by how the content selected should be significant? Let me get this right again. Yeah, here we go. We talk about, okay, we talk about definition of significant varies with an individual's belief. For example, curriculum developers who favor subject matter design think of significant in terms of concept principles of the subject area. Problem-centered design would regard the problem and issues in society as significant. Learner-centered designers think of significant in terms of needs of interest and learners. So this is, once again, it comes to how you view what is important. Now, if you believe you're one of those classical people who believe that knowledge is fixed, then you will focus on body of knowledge. If you are a problem guy, then you will take a problem within society and deliberate on it as part of your content. Whereas if you are a very student-centered person, then you say that now this is significant to the learner and let's work from the learner. So once again, there are three major ways to choose the significance. You can choose it from the content itself because you have a belief that content is king and content is everlasting and a particular body of content needs to be transmitted. Then you can view it from a societal perspective, from a problem-centered perspective where you believe that certain problems are crucial to society and the curriculum should start from there. And the third one, you are learner-centered. You believe that the learner should be the middle of all learning enterprise. So therefore, you pick content based on suitability of the learner itself. So then you have Taba, which is a very classical scholar in curriculum design, further argues that we should not just select content based on cognitive aspect of learners, but also the affective dimension. Now, this is really important. I think the saddest part of many modern schooling system is that we have completely silenced the affective domain. Okay, I will cover this later. The significance, the three major domains, right? You have the cognitive from Bloom's, particularly Bloom's talks in detail. The three domains. You have the cognitive domain, which is all about the mind, which is I believe most of you all have already heard. You know the content application, content comprehension application. You know the six cognitive domain. Then you have two that is always silent. That's the psychomotor domain and the affective domain. And affective domain is how you feel about the subject. So that's what Taba is telling, that it's really sad that or it's really crucial that we focus on how people feel about the subject and give them the passion for the subject rather than just worried about how the content should be delivered. Now let's talk about utility. Now, utility, once again, they have like four different ways to approach the value, the utility value, right? The usefulness. It depends on your philosophical belief. Now, if you have your philosophical belief uh, will decide how useful the content is based on your philosophical belief. Now, if you are problem-centered designer, then you will believe that learning is about social issues. It will enable students to apply directly what they have learned to their daily lives and the world around them. If you're from a socialist perspective, if you're from a psychological perspective, you're looking at the learner itself, right? Then you will take into consideration the needs and the interests of learners, which will enable them to realize their potential to function effectively in the workplace. And then finally, if you're the subject kind of guy, uh, you believe that the content learned from the various subject areas will be useful in the workplace. But they are quite different, but one is purely from the content, one is from the learner, one is from societal. Okay, and the overarching principle is your philosophical belief, the utility. Now let's talk about validity. Now, significant today with the deluge of information that is easy, accessible, which may not necessarily be credible and reliable. Now, knowledge needs to be valid. See, knowledge needs to be significant, it needs to be useful, but most importantly, it needs to be valid. And as I told you, uh, internet has brought its blessings, but it also has brought its curse. The curse of internet is I and you can just go on it and put stuff on it, and if someone else on the other end reads it without discriminating content versus fallacy, they may get their wires crossed. So the notion of validity is very important. Whose knowledge? So it's not only false and true, but whose knowledge? One big issue in Malaysia is now history. It's debated that what is history and whose history is valid. The current government may have its own view of how the historical narrative is presented, whereas somebody else is saying, but this I don't think that this is how the story is. You know, the story may have a twist, and that certain twists are silenced. So basically, the validity of knowledge comes from, I guess, who writes the curriculum. So valid refers to whether the information processed on the student is authentic, obtainable with credible source. It's not only that, right? I'm also talking about from a political stand. Uh, for example, when I say political, don't think only of history. For example, uh, we learn, or at least when I learned calculus, it was presented to us that Newton was father of calculus. But there are evidence to prove that in China, 500 years before Newton was even born, people were using trapezium rule, for example, to find area within underneath a function. So how come that part of truth is not as valid as learning Newton? Newton invented or Newton introduced the notion of calculus. So that's a big issue. Now then you have learnability, right? Okay, let's see what learnability is. Um, Eventually, teachers will end up rushing through the material, and some students are left behind, not understanding the content. Now, this really happens a lot. Even in my own course at this moment, I was so ambitious, or I am really ambitious. Uh, I have a whole big body of knowledge that I want to deliver it effectively to you. But as I go through the course, I realize that I'm stretching or I'm burdening you tremendously, that I have to trim the corners and really flesh out core content as opposed to all the peripheral knowledge. So learnability is really important when you design a curriculum, whether it's the target audience can chew and digest the information in appropriate within the stipulated time. Example of content selected for a particular age group might not be too difficult, and the learners need more time to be uh, more time, but insufficient time is allotted. So that's the whole notion of learnability. Uh, See, like I have problem in this class is it's a postgraduate class, but for many people it's been a long time since they were involved in an academic tradition. So the issue is, how do I engage them in a meaningful way at the same time maintaining the level that this is a postgraduate qualification and needs to be engaged at the postgraduate level. Now, the notion of feasibility, educators who select content have to take into consideration the constraints of time, expertise of staff, funding, and other educational resources that school might face when implementing a curriculum. Now, my folks, this is almost the Achilles heel when it comes to education. Everywhere, even recently, I was watching a YouTube video. Obama gave a statement that he was wanting to pay staff based on achievement. Your pay raise will be directly pegged to your students' academic success. And academic success here, he talks about standardized testing. If your students do well in standardized tests, you will be paid an increment. Because the whole notion is allocating of resources. There's always a limited size pool of resources, and it needs to be distributed to a mass audience, mass market. How do you distribute resources equitably? So the whole notion of curriculum design must take this into consideration. How many lecturers you're going to have? How many hours is practical for students? Like for example, even in this course, right? One of the reasons that we are doing this video is because I can't really have you in my campus. If I have you in my campus, you need to pay tailors $40,000 for this program. I mean, look around. All the other programs, a postgraduate program, vary from 40 to 50 to 60,000. Undergraduate program costs about $70,000. The fact that I was able to peg it here because I told them that if I reduce certain resources such as this, I mean, you can hear me speak reasonably well through the internet. So why do I need to rent a space on campus? By then I could give you back the discount because you're going to use your own internet to listen to me speak. Therefore, we distribute the cost rather than rental to the cost. We give it to you back in discount. So that significantly brings down the the cost to give access to education. See, cost is not about quality; it's about access. I can raise the fees as much as I want in the name of quality, right? But what I automatically do is I reduce access to education, because then only a few could come in. And what use is knowledge if it's not shared? Then you have the content selection has to be considered within the context of existing reality of economics and the role of government. See, this is once again from the school of school situation. If you're talking about contemporary issues, there's a big thing about maths and science being taught in Malay, whether it's taught in English, the economics, the role of the government, and the whole thing comes into play. So, for example, the number of days allocated for teaching may be insufficient to cover all the content because schools have to allocate extra time to extracurricular activities, other school events. Now, in Malaysia, this is a bigger issue than almost anything else. Academics continuously criticize the school that is too into formalized testing, standardized testing, and very little room is given to extracurricular and co-curricular activities, particularly co-curricular, where the sports, the drama, the theater. Of course, in the government schools, they also have a religious issue where many teachers don't view music and drama as positively as some other organizations may do. So this whole issue, once again, how do you balance the feasibility of your curriculum design? So coming back to the final notion of content is the principle of content organization. Now, how do we take that to the next level? Now, it has four major areas: the scope, sequence, integration, and continuity. This is how the principles of organizing the content. Now, from the scope point of view, let's see. Let me get this thing organized first. Okay, the scope talks about, scope refers to both the breadth and the depth of content. Now, this is also another major contesting issue. For example, if you come from Taylor's College background, we teach three pre-U courses. We have the A levels, the classic A levels, which is designed to be taught in 24 months. We do it in 18 months. Then you have the SAM, the Southern Matriculation Program, which is taught within a period of 12 months. And then you have the CPU, the Canadian program. Now, the way they view the breadth and depth is so varied. You have a school that looks very into process. Now, in order to make process work, you have to teach less, because only then students have time to learn the process, because process takes time to acquire. So someone who comes from CPU may say, in my curriculum, we really did stuff on our own. We did research, we did maths by discovery learning, we did physics by discovery experiment, and so on and so forth. Whereas someone in A level will come to say, listen, I had 18 months of pure content. I am deep. Okay, I have only three subjects, and I went all the way, and some of my content cover up to second year of university work. See, they are always a contesting issue about how much depth you want to cover and how much breadth you want to cover. So I guess this is once again your philosophy of organization. When I did my undergraduate studies in the United States, and they took pride that they provide breadth, because they said that 4 years in university is the only time where students are fully engaged in learning, and it's the best time to introduce as many ideas as possible. And subsequently, when you get employed, you spend your whole life in a small area, a body of knowledge, and that's where you get the depth. So if you introduce depth too early, then basically you have people with tunnel visions. I mean, that's their philosophical argument. So let's see. That left to be contested, I guess. So once again, it includes topic, learning experience, organizing trends found in curriculum plan, and things like that. Then you have the scope. You have the scope not only refers to cognitive learning but also the effective learning and psychomotor. Remember, I was telling you about just now how many times we are silent about psychomotor and effective, and that should be included. Sometimes scope of curriculum is narrow, consisting of just a simple listing of key topics and activities. Now, when you organize contents, um, it depends how meticulous the designer is, because you could write week 1 topic A, week 2 topic B, week 3 topic C, and as simple as that. I mean, that is already can be gone. I mean, you can probably go that way, but the other way is to deliberate on learning outcomes, which we will talk about in the next series of videos. Deliberate learning outcomes, deliberate on philosophical, deliver on activities that can achieve the learning outcome, deliberate on tools, measurement tools that you are to use to measure whether you have achieved or attained certain learning objectives. Okay, we can talk about scope. We are concerned about questions such as, let's see what are the questions we are concerned with. Um, how much science should students in primary school know? What are the level of mathematics is required of students before they graduate from secondary school? This is I'm using maths and science partly because of my background, but this same question could be asked in so many dimensions. Like for example, how much of science should a student know? Because when you decide so much of science, then how much of something else you're going to take out? Because this is how you organize. Because you know that you don't have an infinite pit, you have a finite space, finite time, and finite resources. Now you have to decide how much you want, because you can't go on and adding and adding and adding, because sometimes that's what people who do policies are always blindsided off. When they introduce a new policy, they seldom retract an old policy, so it's layered, and continuously added on and on and on. That could become an issue in implementation, because we have too many things to implement, and sometimes they are inconsistent. Okay, and the final part of the scope is uh, when curriculum developers are engaged in deciding how much content should be included, they are determining the scope of the curriculum. Okay, how much, that's where you decide the scope. When deciding the scope of the curriculum, following guidelines may be useful. The guidelines are, let me get this organized. You might see, the first thing is you might want to ask about the usefulness of the content selected. This happens all the time in my area, mathematics, because there's a whole bunch of ideas, uh, and the question is, what do you want to include? If you include less content, you got more time to teach, you can make learning more meaningful, but at the same time, how do you deliberate between breadth and depth? See, so it's always an issue, and as I told you earlier, and I'm repeating myself many times, and I'll continuously repeat myself, the degree of compromise. Education is about compromise, and it's what degree of compromise are you willing to take. You might want to ask whether content caters to diverse student ability. This happens in all many kind of environment. You have people from language diversity, cultural diversity, and content diversity. For example, in a university setting, we have people coming from all kind of backgrounds. Some people are very well prepared. Some people are even overly prepared, and some barely make it because they come from different pre-U organized pre-U backgrounds. So and the background curriculum may emphasize different issues. You may want to ask amount of content selected to be covered in a specific period of time. See, once again, as I was telling you just now, I'm repeating myself here. Time, the decision needs to be made. And the final one here is, you may want to ask if there is a balance between content selected between cognitive, psychomotor, affective, spiritual, moral outcomes. So these are the things that, especially I'm sure after the London riots recently, we want to focus on the spiritual and the moral, because having the best curriculum in the world cannot explain why a whole bunch of young people can suddenly get angry and go on a rampage. So something went wrong after 12 years of schooling experience that couldn't explain that. Then you have the notion of sequencing. Uh, the notion of sequencing is, sequence refers to the uh, organization of content and the and extent to which it fosters curriculum, continuous learning, referred to vertical relationship. Now, the notion of vertical and horizontal, I will talk to you in detail. What it refers to is, um, see, vertical relationship talks about, let's say, what you're going to learn in year 1, year 2, year 3. So they are vertical columns. Okay, and then the horizontal ideas are ideas that are taught across, let's say, semester 1 in each year. So this whole notion of that, and how do you sequence it in an organization way? Do students have opportunity? Do students have opportunity to make connections to enrich their understanding of content? It is important that sequencing the content leads to curriculum development of intellectual and effective process. Okay, as I told you, this They all are kind of repeating, but they are all given prominence here. So the next one in sequencing is the sequence of content and experience should be based on logic of the sequence of the subject matter and the way which individuals learn. Now, this is not as simple as it sounds. Because, for example, subjects that are chronological in logic, for example, maths, physics, right? We all know that this had to come first before that has to come, because patterns, knowledge was built upon existing knowledge. Now, when you look at it back as from a teacher's perspective, from a learner's perspective, that may not be convenient because certain things are easier to learn. So it's one of those heuristic cycles. The more you know, the more you are able to know. The more you are able to know, the more you can know. So sometimes it's not. It's a balance between teaching things in a linear chronological way, or to teach people uh, pockets of information first, and then have a bigger review of putting them together. Because sometimes certain pockets of information is easier to teach. So it's a big decision that needs to be made. Um, it should be based on psychological principles of understanding of human development and learning, as we covered this. And then the following are some principles identified guidelines sequencing. So these are the guidelines by Austin. Let's see what Austin talks about. Now, these are some basic principles. How do we organize content? The notion is it has to move from simple to complex. Let me get this organized. Yeah, it should be organized from simple to complex, and basically it should cover from known to unknown. Okay, it's very important that learning starts from where the student knows. You don't want to jump somewhere in the deep end where from the very get-go people are lost. You should always start a curriculum by issues that people are already familiar with and then extrapolate it to the unknown. Now, the notion of spiraling is a very important thing. In a spiral curriculum, concepts may be introduced from simple level early grades to revisited more and more in a complex level. Okay, spiraling, as you know, like certain things, many things that we do, we learn it first in a lower level, then we relearn it again in a more complex level, and then again and again. There are certain issues that we learn every year. Uh, for example, the notion of writing. I mean, we learn writing in standard 1, we learn writing in standard 3, we learn writing in standard form 1, we learn in form 3, form 5, we even go university, we learn notion of writing, because every time when it's reintroduced at a complex level. So this is called a spiraling notion of the curriculum. Curriculum must really handle prerequisites. It works on the assumption on bits of information or learning must be grasped before other bits of information can be understood. So all curriculum must have assumption, right? Because when for example, when you come into my class, I do have certain assumption that students are able to do this list of things. If you can't do this list of things, then how do you sit in my class? I mean, how do you grasp? There are certain assumptions need to be made because I cannot cover indefinite uh, variations, right? So there are a whole notion of prerequisite, whole to part. Content is better understood if an overview whole is first presented and then the connection between the parts. So if sometimes because some academics or some curriculum could straight away start at such a micro level that content become disconnected or disjoint because you're learning small idea after small idea after small idea, and it takes a really matured mind to put all this together and see a bigger picture. So generally, when you design a curriculum, it's good to talk about the big picture first. People need to know what it really means, why they need to learn it. Rather than jumping straight into the content and start teaching it, they should be aware. Hold on, this is a big thing that I need to learn, and then I will go the part. Then the notion of chronology, right? Uh, which part of the story comes first? It's useful to organize for sequence of content, especially in subjects such as history, political science, and world events. People need to know which came first. You always hear the politicians say stupid things because they fail to understand the chronology of this. Certain events took place far before something else. So the chronology of ideas. For example, my math students will say, "Sir, but why couldn't we use this method to solve this problem?" Because at that time, people haven't discovered this method. Because they fail to understand that content has a story, and the story needs to unfold. Now, vertical organization, as I told you just now, the notion of it simply means that content and skills are arranged so that they build on one another. Okay. and is aligned with general sequence of cognitive development. They are indicative when students learn uh, what they will learn later. So this is the vertical. I will tell you, I'll cover this in more detail in the next chapter. And horizontal organization involves how skills are content are taught during a level of one period of time. So you have how vertically how they are taught in different levels, and then within that same level how they are taught. So you have the vertical organization and the horizontal organization. Now these are some of the technical things you may not need to know in details or the actual terminology, but you need to grasp the general philosophy of things. And then let's come back to the, sorry, let me get this organized. Then we have the notion of integration. Okay, so we covered scope. Now we have covered sequence. Now let's cover integration. Now integration is the bringing together of concepts, skills, values of different subject areas to reinforce each learning. Bits of information are formed from different subjects areas are brought together in such a way that present learners with unified picture of knowledge. Now this is, we have spoken in, I mean everyone speaks about this, but in reality it doesn't take. I mean in my case, I'm a hypocrite here. I told you just now in the beginning that curriculum design has all the components in it. You have the design of the curriculum, the teaching and learning of the curriculum, the assessment of the curriculum, and so on, right? The whole body of knowledge needs to be integrated. However, when I'm teaching you, I told you already that we will cover curriculum here, teaching learning in another course, and an assessment in another course. Why am I not integrating? I don't know. It probably based on historical design. Okay, so the notion of to provide a unified picture. Okay, some have argued that however much curriculum planners try to integrate information, it is the learners who integrate what they are learning in their minds. It is something that happens within the individual learner. In my case, this is what I'm hoping to achieve. The idea of integration was popularized in the 60s by Taba because the concept of school curriculum was too disjoint and fragmented and detached. So that's the whole notion of how integration, and then most importantly is continuity. The curriculum needs to be continuous for people to participate. Continuity ensures the ideas, themes, and skills are repeated as the learners progress through the grades. Why? This is because students may not grasp certain concepts and skills in one experience, but have presented again and become more and more familiar and clearer. Okay, and then let's see what else I have here. uh, Students in primary grades are taught the principles of essay writing. The same principles are repeated in succeeding years. Continuity ensures reappearance of certain major ideas of different grade levels and increased depth and complexity over the length. So this is what we just now covered in the spiraling notion of curriculum. Okay, doing experiments, learning experience that is repeated throughout the teaching and science has increased the level of complexity and abstraction. So that's what I covered. So we have covered now, let me get this thing right again, principles of content organization. Okay, and there should be one more I think we haven't covered. No, that's it. So from content we have four. Okay, from the notion of content we have four. We have what is content, how should learners learn the content, how should content be selected, and principles of content organization. Okay, we have covered content, the four approaches. What is the content, how should student learn content, how should content be selected, and principles of content organization. Then we will move now into the notion of learning experience. Okay, the learning experience itself is, we will cover from three different perspectives. What are learning experiences, criteria for selection of learning experiences, and curriculum design. Now when you come to the first one, what are the learning experiences? Let's drill that down. Okay, now there are a few notions. Let's start from the top. Just give me a few seconds to get this organized. I'm trying to get the biggest font so you can read. So while the content is the meat of the curriculum plan, we can consider learning experience plan for the student as the heart of the plan. This is according to Austin. See, because I mean, you could have the best content plan, right? But if it's not delivered well, I mean, makes no difference. That is why sometimes it's funny. People come to, for example, let's take Taylor's, right? Taylor's College. I may be biased, but nevertheless, I'm telling you my point of view. People say, but A levels is taught everywhere. Why do I come to Taylor's? Because the difference is the written curriculum is the same, but not the learning experience. Okay, the teaching and learning experience is intentionally boosted. People take the trouble to monitor, evaluate, and deliver this. Someone on the other end, the lower end of the spectrum, may just deliver content. And some of us take a lot of trouble to ensure the correct processes are embedded in the learning curve, in the learning process. So you may have the same meat, but you have different hearts. The whole notion of teaching and learning is it's far just as important as having the content. In fact, in my perspective, teaching and learning makes more relevance than just coming up with the curriculum plan. Okay, the learning experience, the next notion, the learning experience are the means towards achieving the goal and objective of the curriculum. See, that's the thing, as I was telling you, the vehicle. In another video, as I told you about, uh, I was trying to draw an analogy because the the written curriculum, or many of you may call it syllabus, it's a dead document, right? It's someone's recipe or someone's aspiration, but it needs to be translated into action for it to manifest, to unfold the content in a meaningful way. So the learning experience is the one that is going to do it well. Okay, learning experience is the instructional component of the curriculum, providing for instruction between teacher, student, and content. So the learning experience where you form this triangle to link teacher, student, and content. Learning experience designed the purpose of achieving the goals, objective of the curriculum plan can be divided into teaching methods adopted, and learning activities. I mean, these are just paraphrasing the same idea. Okay, then there are three more. There are many types of teaching methods. Some examples of teaching method includes, hold on, let me get this right. Okay, includes role playing, field work, and so forth, small group discussion, lecture method, discovery approach, inquiry method. These are basic methods. But the point is the person, and then the other part I like to talk about is the person. The method could be written down, but it's the person who brings it alive, and that person needs to be right. And then you have the term learning activities was used by Taba in her curriculum development model. Okay, and then let's see what she further elaborated. Learning activities are opportunities for students to question, clarify, create, and apply knowledge. See, that's the disadvantage of this platform that I'm using. I'm delivering content to you, right? But if I don't have the workshop that I have on Thursdays, I can't do this clarifying, creating, and help you to apply the knowledge. Because knowledge is not just about delivery, it's about synthesizing. You bring out some, I bring some, together we form this alliance of knowledge, I guess. Examples of learning activities are answering questions, solving problems, journal writing, viewing videos, doing experiments, playing games, and so on and so forth. So these are things that we are familiar with, but you need to be mindful when you're designing this. Both teaching methods and learning activities are equally important parts of learning experience and should be carefully planned. In many instances, this is overlapping between teaching method and learning activities, and some people may find the distinction problematic. Yes. Now, please take some time to think about this. Is teaching equal to learning? Because you may have taught, but learning may not have taken place. But many people believe that just because I have taught, you have learned. I am fully aware if you watch my video even 100 times, you may not have learned. See, learning is not terribly well understood. Learning, in my definition, is something when you intentionally come out of yourself, grasp what is out there and bring it in and digest it and make sense out of it. Now, a lot of these things need you to be intentional. You really need to want to do this. Now, teaching, on the other hand, is repetitively delivering content. I can have certain strategies. I could do it this way, I could do it that way. But the point is, it is not still learning. Learning is when you decide to do this. Teaching is, it's the, and all I can best is orchestrate the environment. I can inspire you to come out. I can motivate you to come out. I can threaten you to come out. But nevertheless, the final fact that if you choose to come out, it's your decision. So that's where a lot of people get this whole thing terribly confused between learning and teaching, because they believe that just because I've taught, the student has learned, and that is not the case. Okay, now we talk about the criteria for selection of learning process. Okay, the criteria. Let's drill that up. Now the criteria for learning experience. Give me a few seconds to get this organized so that you can have the best view. Okay, learning experience, that is the teaching method and the learning activities, are selected to translate the goals and objectives of the curriculum plan. It includes the action of teachers necessary to influence students' behavior and ultimately their learning. Now, this is really important, as I mentioned it earlier, and I would like to repeat myself in this case. This needs to be thought of well. See, sometimes because we view curriculum as just a syllabus, someone may design the order of which content needs to be taught, and then they pass it down to the downline, and they hope that somehow, miraculously, everything else will fall in place. The curriculum, the content needs to go through. See, like for example, if you burn petrol, you don't get anywhere. But the same petrol you need to put in the car and then burn it, then you get somewhere. The car is the one that getting you there. Burning petrol itself doesn't get you anywhere. It just gets you more pollution. So it's the same thing here. If you have a beautiful written content, a beautiful written curriculum, right? A written curriculum, it's not going to allow you to achieve the learning outcome. Only blending it with the right learning experience. And in this case, learning experience has two things: the teaching method and learning activities. If you blend it correctly, that's the vehicle. Then, if the petrol burns in a vehicle, it gets you to the objective. Now, the next notion is the particular actions of teachers may vary according to the teaching method adapted and learning activities used, but they all are aimed towards bringing about learning. Okay, let me get this right. Now, I asked a very learned colleague of mine, how do I know what I'm doing is right? He said, very simple. As long as you keep focusing on how people learn, you'll never go wrong. But that's the goal. People need to learn. You don't need to teach. But many of us may be holding at the wrong end of the stick. We just focus on how to teach. If you focus on how to teach, you are holding on the wrong end of the stick. What needs to happen is people need to learn. You teach so that people learn. So this is what this point is bringing about. Aim towards bringing about learning. Okay. The next point is most important criteria for selection of learning experience to ensure that there's an alignment between objective content and learning experience. See, this is where it's very important that let me get this part. Okay, this is where it's most important, the criteria learning, the alignment, right? See, you have an objective, you have a particular body of content, and you have designed a learning experience. If they all don't sit together and gel harmoniously, it will be completely disjoint. The learning activity will not naturally bring the content alive. When the content is not alive, the objective cannot be achieved. Okay. Now the next notion, learning experience should be able to be selected in terms of feasibility. It has to be feasible, right? You cannot just take from one experience and transplant into another one. And the points here I would like to make is whether the experience suggest can be carried out given the time, available feasibility and expertise of teachers. Okay, it would be futile to propose learning experiences which may be good and on paper but difficult to implement in the classroom because teachers are not trained to facilitate train and facilities are inadequate. Let me a good example. Recently, there was one particular state that started this notion of a laptop for every student. I guess there was a man needed to sell a lot of laptops, so he convinced the government that he should supply the laptops, and this particular state had laptops from a majority of the students. I think in a particular school, if I'm not mistaken. And then when people went to evaluate the effectiveness, they found it to be completely a disastrous. You know why? Because laptop needs batteries and battery needs power to be charged. The school don't have the facility to power or charge these laptops. The laptops cannot run more than an hour or two, especially the cheaper ones, without getting recharged. How do you support a 6 or 8 hour school with a battery that can only last 1 to 2 hours? Does every desk have a laptop? Does every desk have a power source to charge the laptop? No. So how can you design a curricular learning experience with things that are not going? But however, I mean, if I was to present a case study to you, you know how every student is going to bring the laptop, how connection they are. They're going to join in here, put this, put that in. That's one reason why I have my workshop with you in the computer lab, because I need this connectivity, and that's the only place. It's not the most conducive, but it gets my job done. If I had to head in a discussion room, um, you can bring your laptops, but the connectivity is not there. So sometimes you need to really consider all this, the feasibility when you design this. I have a friend who teaches in a Singapore school. They thought it was a great idea to link up with American schools. So what they do is they have this agreement with a classroom in Seattle where they Skype each other's lesson, and fantastically, it was great when they did the pilot study. Everybody was enthusiastically and motivated. But when it came down to like 1 month after the pilot study, things were disastrous. Students were complaining because the Americans have to get up early in an odd time, come to school. Then the Singaporeans have to go to school in odd times in order for the time to synchronize. And eventually the novelty weared out and it was no longer feasible. So these are the considerations that you need to make. Learning experience should be selected on the basis whether they will ensure students learning of the content as well as motivate them to continue learning. Now, this is really, really important. Particularly, I teach a very boring subject called mathematics. The idea is we can focus on learning, but we don't focus on continuity of learning. See, every lesson or every idea should be left in dangling in a funny way that it lures you to want to go on. So when you organize content, you should always say, well, when you come back next week, this is what we're going to do, or well, the next chapter will go in depth in this, and it always motivates you to go on. I mean, I guess this is where we can learn from many serials that always leave the interesting part next week. You follow the movie for about 45 minutes, and then just as the climax about to kick in, they said to be continued. I guess that's one way to keep attention going. Learning experience should also attempt to develop thinking skills of students and stimulate greater understanding of their own existence as individuals of members of the group. See, once again, if remember there was a three approaches. We had the content approach, the sociological approach, and the psychological approach. So here we talked about the importance of the psychological approach. It needs to make you feel competent. It needs to answer your questions. Yes, we need to answer social problem. We need to participate in the notion of mastery of content. But end of the day, the learning experience should be beneficial to you. Only when you have benefited, the society around you benefits. And only if the society around you benefits, particular epistemology or particular domain of knowledge will expand. So these are very important issues. The selection of learning experience educators should not separate content from experience. I mean, there's so much said before this, and this is an excellent point that to be said here. You can't train scientists by delivering science. You need to transform people into become scientists, not match them with content, things like that. Both content learning experience, both content and learning experience do not exist in isolation. This is really important. People believe that I have interviewed young staff who come to our faculty, uh, and especially mathematicians and scientists love saying this. Oh, I love my content. I teach because I have no other choice. These are people who make a bad teacher. You have to love the content and you have to appreciate the learning experience. Only then the whole thing becomes meaningful. Okay, so that's the criteria for learning experience. Let's drill it up again, and let's go to the final part, uh, curriculum design. Okay, the final part is called curriculum design. Let's go quickly run through what I've prepared for you. Subject um, Subject-centered design are by far the most popular and widely used curriculum design. This is because knowledge and content are well accepted as integral parts of curriculum. Since acquiring a body of content is integral in any school system, much thought has focused on how best to present the knowledge, skills, and values of a subject to learners, and 5 approaches have been proposed. Okay. Now, I remember, I think I've mentioned it before in another video. Someone interviewed me for the very first time, and I was really moved by helping young people when I started to involve in teaching. And my focus uh, was to help young people. Unfortunately, the only thing I knew was maths. So when this person asked me, your passion and your subject don't match, and my answer to him, although I wasn't thinking about it, but it was very profound when I think about it now. I told him, I'm here to help young children, young adults, but the medium in which I could engage them was mathematics. But the focus is to help them understand the world. I don't know, I was very idealistic when I was young. So I guess that's what we talk about. We can't run away from content, right? Regardless of how we view our philosophical approaches to this world, whether it's from a critical pedagogy or perennialist, we can't run away that school is a lot to do with content, and education is a lot to do with content. Okay, so there are 3 major parts. There is the subject-centered design, the learner-centered design, and the problem-centered design. We will go in detail about this in the next chapter. So there are 3 major curriculum design: subject-centered, learner-centered, and problem-centered. Let's drill down each one of them in particular. We'll start off with subject-centered. Subject-centered is, let me get this organized, subject-centered so that's easier for us to view. Okay, when you come about subject-centered, there are 5 ways to approach this notion. You have the academic subject design, you have the discipline design, the broad field design, correlation design, and process design. Okay, this is really important. Subject-centered design has 5 approaches. Let's start off with the academic subject design. The academic subject design is both the oldest and the best known design to most people because it is the way many of them were educated. Is this true for you? When I mean academic subject design, you you basically had a whole bunch of things organized, and you learned it the way in sequence. You learned maths, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Then you had maths had 3 parts. You have algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and things like that. This design is based on the belief that humans are unique because their intellect and the quest for acquisition of knowledge to feed this intellect. So it is believed that you naturally want to know. So that's why you wanted to participate in the world of academics. And in 1930, indicated that academic subjects design model for American schools should compromise language and its use of reading, writing, grammar, and literature, mathematics, science, history, and language. So basically in 1930 people kind of formalized what academic should be, because prior to this there were schools with interest groups. Certain interest groups such as religious interest groups, trade interest groups had their own school systems. So somewhere around 1930, at least in American case, there was an attempt made to formalize this experience. So they believe that the entire academic, that they designed the subjects from an academic perspective. They had a list of subjects you have to finish, and the experience need to be uniformed rather than uh, by interest groups. Okay, it is not only, it has not changed till today. Okay, one reason given is that it's much easier to interpret textbooks and commercially available support material. And this is the notion of historical approach to curriculum. Hey, it's there already, it's easier, that's the way we have always done it, and let's keep it that way. So that is uh, this notion of academic design. Okay, let's go back to academic design. Okay, um, academic design. Then you have the notion of discipline design. So discipline design, let's see what I have for you. A discipline is a specific body of knowledge that has its own method of inquiry, which has specialized words and terminologies, has a tradition, has a collection of literature and persons involved in the field of theoreticians and practitioners. Proponents of discipline design model emphasize that teaching of a discipline in the purest form. In other words, a student who studies biology would approach the subject as a biologist, while those who study history will study as a historian. What is the rationale for teaching the discipline? What is the rationale for the? According to the proponents, the school is a mini version of the world of intellect, and that it is discipline reflects the world. Now, basically, let me put it in a nutshell. If you walk into any school system today, right, there will be no difference from, at least from the cosmetic perspective, whether you walk in a history class, a maths class, a science class, or biology class. But in reality, the way a biologist thinks is so different from a way a historian thinks. So what this model is proposing is you should teach them the way the discipline requires them to think. So if geographers think in a particular way, then teach geography to match the profession. Teach the student the way experts from that field behave. So a biology lesson will not start in the classroom. It will start in the lab, where people start tinkering with ideas. They form hypotheses. They explore options, and then they conclude. But in the modern setting, we go to a classroom, we have PowerPoints, people talk about all the ideas. They probably go to the lab just to verify a few things, but not in the truest sense learning. I mean, how many of us have studied physical geography by actually touching things from a tactile perspective? We just read books about stalagmites, stalactites, but never really having a feel and sense of this. So that's what the discipline design talks about. Now you have the broad field design. Let's see what I have for you. The broad field design is also known as the interdisciplinary design. Okay, the main reason for this design arises from the concept that subjects are taught too compartmentalized and fragmented. Geography, geometry, literature, algebra, and so forth. The suggestion that to bring together content from different subjects to form a logical subject. For example, economics, sociology, political science, geography, and history were combined to form social studies. Okay, and then the notion of problems with this model. Okay, nothing comes, all life is yin and yang, right? One issue of breadth versus depth. Now, people always forget about this. They talk about integration, right? How we can bring all these things together. But when you bring all this together, you challenge the first notion that we talked earlier about resources, time allocation. And when two, just imagine this, right? When two body of knowledge join together, you have a particular bridge. Just imagine the two twin towers, right? There are about 88 floors or whatever. There is a particular bridge connecting. Let's take, for example, it's connected on the 70th floor. Now, when I'm exploring the connection of the two buildings, I'm exploring the 70th floor. What about the other floors? I mean, there are 88. 88 minus 1 is 87 floors in both buildings. But since I'm only studying how things are connected, I'll be only focusing on the floor which there's a bridge. The subsequent bridges, the subsequent floors are not analyzed. So this whole issue of bringing subjects together and try to study them in an integrated manner, sometimes you will miss out the details of a subject because it doesn't come about naturally when you integrate with other subjects. So, for example, studying social studies, over a year, students will expose to a variety of social science concepts compared to only studying economics concept for a year. So, if you study just pure economics for 1 year, as opposed to studying social studies for 1 year, there are a lot of economics you're going to miss out. Okay. Now, certainly, treatments of various social science concepts will be superficial. However, for sure, a year of economics exposed students to more economic concepts, principles, uh, than social studies. However, some may argue whether students need such in-depth knowledge of a particular subject. If educational philosophy is to give students an overview of social science, then social studies might be a logical choice. See, as I told you, it's always a compromise. You want depth or you want meaningfulness, because depth and breadth are two contradicting philosophies. They don't sit together well side by side. Now what I have to say for the broad field design. Now let's talk about the correlation design. Let me drill down. The correlation design model lies between academic design and the broad field. So it's somewhere between, right? It brings together the academic design, which is very traditional, and then the broad field design of integrating things. Uh, if you do not want a curriculum to consist of 5 separate subjects, and neither do you want 5 different subject areas to be focused on a single subject, then correlation design model might be an alternative. You may want to fuse or correlate history with literature as the secondary school level. Okay, and what I mean by this is, um, for example, in a history lesson, the class learns about Japanese occupation in Malaysia. During the literature lesson, students read novels and life during that period. However, each subject retains its own distinct identity. Now, in some schools, particularly primary schools, they call this thematic teaching. They they do not integrate the subject into a single subject, but they integrate it through themes. So, for example, if this week we're going to talk about evolution, or let's pick something less controversial, environmental pollution, then the science teacher will bring certain issues to talk about environmental pollution. The language teachers will make you write essays consistent with pollution and environment. Uh, Whatever subjects, the music teacher or the drama teacher may act out plays about conditions where what will happen to man when Earth in the year 2050 or something, when things start falling apart. So this correlation design doesn't really dissolve the notion of the academic base model, or it doesn't come into the broad field design where you collapse everything into a single entity, and things loses its strength. You still keep them independently, but you bring them together in the form of individual exercises or individual themes. Okay, so that's correlation design, and the final one is process design. Now let's see what I have for you. In the discipline based design discusses earlier, students learn of methods of inquiry used by experts in respective fields. Okay, so what I meant by that is, studying anthropology, students will learn various ethnographic procedures and use in the field. So that's what discipline. You study something the way the experts do. Advocates in the process design model stresses on learning of general procedures and processes that are not applicable to any particular discipline. Mm, He, he most The most, sorry, I forgot the T. The most popular example of the process design is teaching thinking skills. Various educators have suggested that students should be taught to think. Curriculum has focused on teaching the decision making, problem solving, critical thinking, and creative thinking. And finally, Ines talks about identifying a list of critical thinking skills that should be taught, such as identification and fallacy, cracking the credibility of source, and so on and so forth. So in the design model, in the process design model, we are talking about bringing in, focusing on some of the generic processes that may not have been covered in the discipline design. See, the discipline design was very specific, right? It's for your discipline, whereas the process design focuses on things that generally everybody needs. So here I have, let me close this. In the subject-centered design, we have 5 approaches. That is academic. Let me tell you, generally academic is the traditional school system, right? Someone decided that these are the 5 things that, or 10 things everybody needs to know. The discipline design, it talks about how it could be trait based. Let's say all sociologists learn this way, study, do things the way authentically sociologists do. Then you have broad field design, collapsing everything, making it a single subject, but it has its own strengths and weaknesses. Then you have correlation design, bringing the different subjects together by event by event. And then finally, you have the process design. Okay, now let's talk about the learner-centered design. And once again, the learner-centered design has 3 parts. You have the child-centered design, the radical design, and the humanistic design. And we will focus first on the child-centered design. Uh, The child-centered design starts. Proponents of the child-centered design believe that learners should actively participate in the teaching and learning process. Okay, proponents believe that child-centered design believes that learners should actively participate. So it's not about teachers; it's about the learner being involved. Then you have learners should be related closely to the daily lives of students. Learning should be related closely to the daily lives of students, unlike subject-centered design, which tends to separate content with daily lives of learners. In child-centered design, focuses on the needs and the interests of the learner. Okay. Then, in early advocates of child-centered design curriculum was French philosopher Jean Rousseau. John, I know him as Rousseau, John Jacob Rousseau, whatever. In his book Emily, sorry, I'm sorry about my pronunciation. A book in his book called Emily, where the child focuses on education processes. So Rousseau talks about how the learning uh, personalized. It should be within the domain and the culture and the context of the child. Perhaps the most well-known advocate of child-centered is Dewey. It comes under the notion of progressivism. He argued that child are not a blank slate. They bring with them the 4 basic impulses: the impulses to communicate, the impulses to compare and contrast, the impulses to inquire, and the impulse to express themselves through language. And then you have the notion of in the child-centered design, teaching and learning draws down to experience of the learner and the vast amount of information that they bring to the classroom. This is really important, folks. When you go into a group of students in front of you, you don't see a bunch of uniform androids. These are people with real lives, with real past historical background. They come to you differently, and you allow them to engage. You will allow an enriched environment. If you terminate their participation, then you really miss out a big part of the curriculum. Now, sometimes do you wonder why major big universities like Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge give substantial scholarships to poor students around the world, or people of diverse interests? I mean, those who handle student admission will know that certain students with musical talent or certain co-curricular participation will always get an added advantage of students who just have academic credentials. This is the reason why. Because if you have a collection of diverse people of diverse interests and diverse ability, the overall experience become richer. So major schools like Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, Yale, and all this have go out of the way to bring in people with diverse interests and talent, so that when you put them together and you discuss ideas, you get things that otherwise it will be missed out. If everything is so uniform, you don't get this richness. Using this design, teachers and students negotiate what if of interest of learners and what content is to be included in the curriculum. Okay, teachers and students participate in planning lessons, units, its purpose, the focus on content and learning activities to be introduced in teaching learning situations. Hence, in meeting the needs of students, the child-centered curriculum will continuously change. See, as long as I remember this when I was young, right? When I first started teaching, one of my uncles told me, "What a boring profession! You spend the first year mastering your content, and the next 29 years repeating the content." And he failed to understand this. We never repeat our content because our audience change. If you are content driven, yes, the content don't really change, right? If you're teaching post independence Malaysian history, nothing really changes. But if you view yourself as educating the young minds, the young mind in you is different. So approaches vary, the connectivity vary, the gratification of approaching them vary. Okay, so that's the notion, right? The child-centered model, the interest and experience of learners become subject matter of the curriculum. So you don't the interaction itself becomes the subject matter. Children are given the freedom to discover first hand by doing things for themselves rather than being told what to do, uh, told how to do something. Okay, so that is the child-centered design. Then let's drill this down, and then the final one, child-centered design. Then you have the radical design. Let's see what I have for you for radical design. In this design, the focus is the learner, which is quite similar to the child-centered design. The difference being that greater emphasis is placed on the need of the curriculum to reform society. Okay, proponents of radical design operate on the assumption that society is corrupt and repressive. Children should be educated towards the goal of social reform. A well-known proponent of radical design was Paulo Freire. I think we have mentioned this in our philosophy part, who proposed that treating students as an empty vessel to be filled with knowledge by the teacher. He objected to the teacher-centered dichotomy and proposed that relationship between teacher and student to be reciprocal. That is, the teacher who learns and the learner who teach. See, because if you consider the learning and the teaching as a dynamic process, you learn what to teach through this engaging your students. And when the students engage with you, they learn. So it's a reciprocal relationship of these two. So it's not about teacher and student as two separate things, the dichotomy. It's actually it's like a yin and yang thing. When I engage you in a meaningful way, then I will learn how to engage you better. Because you engage with me better, I will be able to since you will be able to learn better. So he's talking about creating an sustainable system. And most importantly, don't forget the radical design is to improve mankind. We believe the notion of education here is not to preserve society but to improve society. Okay, and then according to the proponents of curriculum design, learning is reflective and not externally imposed by those in power. When learners create meaning, they have ownerships. When learners should challenge content and allow to give the opinions about information given to them. Knowledge is not finished product, but to be acquired by learners because it's indoctrinate. Because this is okay. Let me go that part again. Knowledge is not the finished product to be acquired by learners because this is indoctrination. Learning is something that results from interaction between and among people. Curriculum should be designed to free learners from indoctrination. Okay, so folks, that is the radical design model. And now the final part is the humanistic design. Let's see what I have for you there. The humanistic design became popular in the 16th and 70s, as you know, the hippie movement or the counter culture movement for the Vietnam War and all those stuff, right? The humanistic 50s and 60s in the United States. Proponents of the humanistic design is based on their arguments on the principles of humanistic psychology. The basic question asked is whether the curriculum has allowed the person to be truly the person to achieve his or her full potential. The curriculum should be designed to empower learners to be involved in the process of realizing this potential. Greater emphasis was to be placed in effective domain and permit students in feeling and value. Now let me give this in a nutshell. When a student leaves your class, they should feel better. Period. Hopefully they have learned some content. Hopefully they had some meaningful experience, and hopefully they own the content that they learned. But what the humanistic design believes is when someone comes through the process of education, they should leave better off, psychologically speaking, not being hampered and identified by the school system of their weaknesses and made them and deprived them of self pride and 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 self pride. Okay. Now, to facilitate learning, the teacher accepts learners as person, placing importance of their feelings, their options of caring for them. In other words, the teacher is able to view the world through the student's eyes. There's a lot of empathy going on here. Okay, with such a curriculum, learners will be able to become fully functional person capable of intelligent choice, and critical learners would be able to approach problem situation with flexibility and working cooperatively with others. And the final point I would like to make, the humanistic curriculum design focuses on interconnectedness of the cognitive, affective, and the psychomotor domain. The design stresses on development of positive self-concept and interpersonal skills of learners. So that is what you have as for the humanistic design. So in the learner centered, you have the child centered, you have the radical design, and the humanistic. So in a nutshell, a child centered design is about the learning of the child, how the child acquires, participates. The radical design is to make the situation better. The whole idea is we believe that people are indoctrinated with information and people are colonized by a particular culture, and how the school system or the learning experience will emancipate them. And the humanistic design emphasizes on how one should go through the process and become psychologically better off. Not in many cases, if you're not, you would have noticed that people go through the school system and become worse off. They are traumatized by their learning experience. Now, the final part of the curriculum design is uh, problem centered design. And let me see what I have for you over here. The focus of this category of model is problem faced by society. Problem centered design is predetermined before the arrival of students. In other words, genuine life projected and teaching learning activities organized around this issue. The life centered situation, and what I have is any any society that are persistent life situation, any society there are persistent life situations that are crucial to society's successful functioning. They are argued by advocates that makes educational sense to organize the curriculum around such life situations. Students will see direct relevance in studying such social issues when making and when they are related to their world. The life situation that needs to be emphasized in schools will depend on what students need before entering the world of working and assuming adult responsibility. Life-centered situation curriculum has been criticized because students do not learn much of subject matter. However, proponents of the model state that it is not true because design draws heavily from the traditional subject areas. The content is organized in manner that allows students to see problems faced by society. Okay. Now let me talk in the life-centered. Okay, the life-centered solution. Of course, it generally means that we focus on real things and real situations, and people will learn content through participating and solving real life problems. But as I told you just now, sometimes by you solving a problem, the learning outcomes are not uh, comprehensive, because there are a lot of things that the problem doesn't engage with. So by only solving problems, you only may repetitively see certain ideas, and certain ideas may be missed through the learning experience. So there's always a debate whether, but then, however, the critics may argue that if you teach subjects outside a context, people never really understand anyway. So why don't we just teach within the context? But then certain purists will argue if you teach within the context, there are a lot of abstract and meaningful things that people may need in a more advanced and sophisticated context may not be taught in the situation that you are engaging students in. Okay, then you have the core design. It's a variation of life-centered situation design. Is the core design model. Focus is still on processing problems in society. The difference being that certain problems are selected from the core. The careful planning before students enter the schools are adjusted when necessary. The core problems are taught to all students in block time format, whereby 2 or more periods in the classrooms are used. The problem solving approach is adapted to analyze social problems. Students are selected Students select a problem through consensus and work their entire individuals in groups. Data are collected, analyzed, interpreted, and present to class. Findings are evaluated and discussed. So it's almost the same thing, but the core design. So what they do is the content is designed or derived through core problems. If you answer this core problem, then these are the different things that one could learn. So it's designed from that way, right? And then the final one is the social problem design. Social problem design is reconstructive design, analyzing serves confronting human crime. So this comes again from your different approach to philosophy. So that's the problem-centered design. Now, so basically, as I mentioned earlier, from the curriculum design, you have three. You have the student-centered design, learner-centered design, problem-centered design. If you have gone through with me the details, you will see overlapping themes. The reason why they are overlapping is very simple. You are actually integrating two different things. We have different philosophy of approaches and philosophies of knowledge and content, right? Then we have different philosophies of design. So basically, there is a match. For every design model, there will be one for people who think from a content perspective. There will be one from people who think from a process perspective. There will be one for people who think from a praxis perspective. So if you see, you will see the overlap, and you must see the overlap, because there is a design. For each design, the designers must satisfy their own philosophical and approach needs. Okay, so that is the end of the curriculum design part. Let's go back to the main topic that I wanted to discuss. Let's drill up. It's taking me longer than it should. Okay, so as I mentioned just now, the whole idea, we had talked about content and learning experience. The content itself, we talked about a few major themes. Uh, they are they are let me see, why is it taking longer than it should? Okay, the content itself, we talked about what is content, how should student learn content, how should content be selected, the principles of content organization. Then we covered learning experience. We had three major issues, right? We have what are learning experience, criteria for selecting learning experience, and the curriculum design itself. And most importantly, I would like to go further in detail of curriculum design. You have the subject centered, the learner centered, and the problem-centered designs. Okay, I hope I've done a decent job covering this notion of curriculum design. Thank you very much.